I first began this project by creating a quick drawing and a rough sizing of what I thought my pattern would be, including the opening hardware, which I had purchased. And because I'm creating my own pattern here, I needed to cut out the pieces of paper with a seam allowance and then staple that together and start building it around the hardware that I purchased online for the opener for this bag. Because the paper is more rigid than fabric, I would later find that I would need to make adjustments to my pattern to accommodate the hardware properly. And creating this mock-up really gave me confidence to move forward with this project. The carpet bag did originate in the United States around the mid-19th century, and it was originally designed as a traveling bag and often created by repurposing worn out or outdated carpets. They were known to be durable and fashionable and were often seen in the hands of well-to-do travelers who had an obvious sense of wanderlust. I continued on creating my official pattern for these bags and essentially based the measurements off of a personal item for flying, as well as the 16-inch hardware for the opening that I had purchased. The pieces I'm cutting out for the liner are outdoor upholstery fabric in this paisley pattern, and it's quite thick and quite durable with a little water resistance. Because this is the first time I'm assembling any parts for this pattern I'm creating, I really wanted to make sure that I pinned it exactly how it needed to be in order to get the best example of what this is potentially going to turn out as I'm building more pieces for these bags. I am a bit of an inexperienced sewer, so I really took my time with each step here in order to hopefully not have to go back and make too many changes with what I was creating. Here I am using a serger to combine all of the parts of the liner, and I recently picked up this serger at the thrift store for $80. I wasn't able to test it out, but sincerely, after having a friend come over and thankfully helping me pull this thing together and get started with it, I was off to the races, and it's honestly a game changer. In creating the sleeves for the opening hardware, I left a little extra seam allowance because the body outside of the bag and the liner for the bag will be sewn into that piece and it will hold everything together. So I really wanted to make sure that those had a little extra on there and gave me a little room for improvisation. Here I am attaching the sleeve for the opening hardware onto the interior liner, and it's giving me the first opportunity to see how the liner and the opening hardware interact when I'm opening and closing it. And then I was able to pin and make a modification to that liner and then adjust my pattern for the next liner properly so that I didn't have to deal with any more excess fabric than I needed to. For the exterior body of this first bag, I'm using this winter-themed 1970s wall tapestry. I first began by cutting the frame off the tapestry and then choosing which portions I wanted to use for the front and back of the exterior of this bag. For the age of this fabric, it's quite durable still, and I didn't notice that the edges were fraying out of the weave at all while I was cutting it apart. For the exterior of this second bag, I'm using these wonderful hand-woven Turkish Kalim saddle bags. And if you're familiar with the Kalim rugs, you'll know that they're a really durable, tight woven wool, but they're not high piles, so they're perfect for this project. And after some quiet personal debate, I actually opted to go with the simple striped pattern versus the more geometric side of the saddlebags. In order to give the bags a little bit more structure, I purchased this iron-on interfacing. And what it does is it gives the fabric a little bit more rigidity by binding this fabric to the backside of the pieces that you're working with. And what you do is you cut out a piece of interfacing that roughly matches the size of the pieces you're working with, and then you put it on the backside, and then you put a piece of fabric over the interfacing to protect it from being burned by the iron. And what it does is it also reduces wrinkles in your fabric and does give it that rigidity that you're seeking. I'm using the serger here to bind the edges of all of my separate pieces for the final assembly of this first bag. I even used two separate parts of the original tapestry frame to create the side panels for the bag. And the same way I completed the interior liner, I'm combining all of my side panels onto the bottom portion and then sewing up the sides. But at this point, I did notice with the serged edges, as well as the thickness of the tapestry, it was beginning to put a bit of strain on my sewing machine, but I just continued forward and went as slow as possible. And you can see how much structure the bag is getting with that interfacing combined onto the fabric. On the second bag, I actually inadvertently used the serger to combine all of the separate pieces into the overall shape of the bag, and it actually worked. But again, it did challenge my serger's capabilities to the edges of what it was actually able to do with the thickness of these fabrics. I cut these thrifted black leather biker pants into some shorts and then used the remaining pant legs as material for my handles and other accessories for this bag. This leather is very soft and easy to sew, and all I'm doing is creating my handle shapes and the mountings for those handles, and essentially just doubling it up to increase its durability overall. And because leather is not a woven material, it doesn't fray at the edges at all, so you're really able to modify and make things look really uniform. I made sure to double reinforce everywhere where these pieces were attached because I wanted the weight to be distributed evenly throughout the outer portion and that it hung correctly. One modification I did make to this one was detaching the bottom portion and then reattaching a double reinforced matching piece to the rest of the other pieces, which made it match perfectly. I found this belt at the thrift store and I replaced the buckle. The original was a silver buckle and I replaced it with a brass buckle, and I added it around the bag with these little screw-on grommets. There may be a better tool for this, but I used a drill with a drill bit to drill the holes here and then attach the grommets to everywhere that I possibly could where I feel like it needed a little bit more reinforcement. I also found these leather chaps, which I disassembled using an X-Acto knife, and then I used my pattern to trace what will be a bottom for the second bag. I'm using super heavy duty scissors to cut through this leather, which wasn't too difficult, but they're super great to have around. I wanted to add feet to this base, so I created little holes and then I added these antique buttons on here that have these pin backs, and then I firmly attached these pin backs using this hand stitcher. And what you do is you thread through the handle of the stitcher and then up through the entire thing, and what it does is it simply creates a hand sewing machine. And you're going to see me using this a lot through the rest of this video. But what you do is you thread it through, then you loop through a loop, and then you pull it back using tension, and then you just do it again and again and again. Admittedly, it did take a while to get the hang of the flow with it, but I eventually did. While preparing for this project, I did notice while looking at images of historical carpet bags, they had this bespoke quality, like there was this element of reuse with them. And I wanted to take that into this project specifically because I like things that look handmade, but I also loved that quality of them being made possibly from old parts. For all of the attachments, I went to a place called Tandy Leather, and they actually have an online store, and I will leave a link to that store in the description. With so many skills, leathercraft is something that takes a lot of time to learn, and just being able to experiment with these things, being able to try different ideas out is so refreshing because I feel like sometimes we get trapped in certain skills that we have because it's easy to go back to those, but you can kind of open your brain up to so many different things. And then once you start working that pace of learning, you just kind of go further and further, and you suddenly have learned 3 or 4 new skills within one project. And that's one of the best things about trying something new. I did make one more modification by making leather sleeves for the opening of this one. I just got into the matchy-matchy quality of it and thought it would look better in the end. By the time I was combining the interior liner, the exterior tapestry material, as well as the leather I used on the sleeve for that opening hardware, there was a lot of bulk there, and so the hand stitcher was really important to use on this one because it was able for me to give really purposeful small stitches and making sure that those were being taut and held tight throughout the entire bag, and just really making sure that everything was attached. But that is the face of a man who is afraid of stabbing his finger with that huge hand stitching needle. And finally, I pinned the interior liner with the opening hardware already attached to it, and then I was able to use the sewing machine for the front and back long portions of that. And then I did hand stitch the sides of that and where it went around the opening hardware to make sure that those stitches were super intentional and super tight on that, and that it opened and closed properly, folding around that hardware. And then I added a buckle and another strap for the top of this one, giving it a little bit more style. And I did go through the liner on that because I forgot to put that buckle on before. And for one final detail, I pulled a couple of tassels off this other bag and attached them to the side corners of the opening hardware for a little extra style, because this bag is for me.